like a million years since I uploaded a new video, but I'm excited about this one. It's about cryptocurrency and basically like what is cryptocurrency and just the details that you need to know, because I was so confused about this topic for so long and I felt like probably there are other people out there in the world who are also confused. So let's dive in. So cryptocurrency is a digital currency. A digital currency is a currency that only exists electronically. We used to place value in things that were physical, like wheat or bread or apples or cattle, right? Over time, we moved away from placing our trust into the object, like gold or wheat, and into placing our trust in a person. So now all currencies are tied to the government, and we place our trust in the government. The government said at some point, okay, we'll take your bar of gold and we'll insure it, and you don't have to divide this gold into a bunch of pieces to pay people. We're gonna give you some paper money that represents your gold. And so just trust us with your gold, and then you can use your money to pay for things. Then over time, we moved away from the gold standard. So money was no longer backed up by gold because governments were starting to print money. The government just said, okay, actually, JK, you're not gonna get $100 for every bar of gold. You're just gonna trust us. We're gonna ensure that your money has value, and we can print more of it or detract some of it, or we can do whatever we want. You just trust us and you are in possession of our currency. Money doesn't actually have value because it's valuable. It has value because the government says it has value. When prices rise over time, it's not actually because prices are rising. It's because the government is printing more money. If there's a greater amount of money in circulation, that means that each and every dollar in circulation is actually worth just a little bit less, and that's why prices rise. In 2008, some dude named Satoshi Nakamoto published a research paper claiming that he had a formula or had an idea of how to make a digital currency that didn't have to be tied to any one government. Bitcoin was the world's first cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency wouldn't exist without a whole network of people supporting it, and without a little thing called cryptography, which was invented in this 2008 research paper. So you can exchange bitcoins in a worldwide peer-to-peer network of computers. But a bitcoin is not like a file, it's not like an MP3 or a docx file, it can't just be copied. A bitcoin is actually one entry on a huge global ledger called the blockchain. So the blockchain is the record of every Bitcoin transaction that has ever happened. When you send someone Bitcoin, you're not sending them like an MP3 file or a docx file. You're basically just updating the blockchain ledger, and you're saying like, okay, Jamie sent Sandra 5 Bitcoin, and that goes on the blockchain ledger, and that's how we know that Sandra now has 5 Bitcoin. So the crazy thing about Bitcoin, and one of the reasons why it's so controversial, is that even though the blockchain is an official ledger of all Bitcoin transactions, there's no central authority that keeps track of all these transactions. The blockchain is actually maintained by a bunch of volunteers who keep track of all the Bitcoin exchanges. If I wanted to send Bitcoin to someone, I have to basically announce this to the Bitcoin community, and then everybody who updates the blockchain will put a little note of this on their ledger. So I have to announce a few key things. I have to announce my account number, I have to announce the account number of the person I'm sending Bitcoin to, and I have to announce the amount of Bitcoin that I want to send. Then all these individual volunteers make a mark on their independent blockchain ledger saying that this is happening and that I'm sending Bitcoin to somebody. This seems like possibly a security threat, right? Like, what's stopping someone from just learning someone else's account number and then saying, okay, I own that account number and I want to send Bitcoin to myself, right? So this is where cryptography comes in. So when you make an account within the Bitcoin network, your account is linked to 2 keys, a public key and a private key. When you send a message through the Bitcoin network, you sign it with your private key. Then the system will check and see if it matches with your public key, and if it does, then the network accepts your signature as valid. So unlike the ledger of a bank, which is completely private, the Bitcoin ledger is actually completely public. So anyone can check the ledger at any time and see all this money flowing from one person to the next, but the account number of any given individual is completely anonymous. So you don't know who belongs with which account, there's no names, but the ledger is a public ledger. So timing is a really interesting thing when it comes to the public ledger of Bitcoin. Basically, lots of people around the world are keeping their own record of the ledger. And sometimes different people keeping track of the ledger will have a different order in which transactions were received, which seems really confusing. So how do they decide whose track or whose ledger to add to the official ledger next? Basically, if you want to add a block, which is like a list of transactions, to the official blockchain ledger, you have to solve like a math problem, and that's why we get the term cryptocurrency. This math problem that you have to solve is actually a hash function. If you've never heard of a hash function, that's okay, I'm about to explain it. So basically, a hash function is a function that takes a certain input and then runs a predictable process on that input and then returns an output. So let's say a hash function, the process that it did was add numbers together. So let's say the input is 4 and 5. The output is going to be 9. The interesting thing about a hash function is given the same inputs, it'll always give the same output. But given an output, there's no way that you can really know the inputs. Like if you have the number 9, you don't know what numbers added up to give you the number 9. There's a bunch of different variations that could work for that output. To guess the input of a certain output, you have to manually guess every single possible combination that could yield that output. If you've ever seen a Bitcoin miner on YouTube or just heard about them, you know that they spend a lot of money on these computers that they use to try to crack these hash functions. And so a Bitcoin miner will spend a lot of money on electricity manually guessing every single possible input that could possibly yield the output so that they can add their block to the chain next. Because the Bitcoin miner who guesses the input first is the person who gets to add their ledger to the blockchain. So another important fact is for every 200,000 blocks that are added to the blockchain, the number of Bitcoin rewarded to a miner actually decreases slightly. So originally miners were rewarded 50 Bitcoins for every time their block was added to the blockchain. Then it decreased to 25, and now it's hovering at around 12.5. Interestingly, credit to the dude who invented Bitcoin, he actually modeled the rate at which Bitcoins are produced to model the rate at which precious metals like gold are dug up from the ground, which is super fascinating and weird. So what are the conclusions of Bitcoin? Is it a scam? Should you be investing in it? Is it super important to understand and know about? Personally, I think the most interesting conclusion that we can draw is that just like information became decentralized because of the internet, it's possible that money could become decentralized because of Bitcoin. In the old days, your main sources of information were like magazines like the New Yorker, New York Times, Vogue, whatever. And then the internet kind of took over, and now we get tons of information from Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and things like that. Similarly, if money is attached to a bank or a central government, then the government can revoke the value of your money at any time. The government can shut down your bank. The government could have all types of power over the value of your currency. Where if your company completely runs on Bitcoin, the government actually has very little power over that. It's an international decentralized currency that can't be interrupted by any governing body. Exactly. Bitcoin also creates a really interesting opportunity for people who live in more remote places where they don't have access to a bank that they trust, or their government is very unstable, because if they have a Wi-Fi connection, can use Bitcoin for tons of different transactions and have a currency that they trust, even if they don't live in a place where they trust the currency in their country. This last conclusion is just a speculation, but Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general does kind of shift the power balance between really big CEOs like Jeff Bezos and really big governmental leaders like the president or something. Because if the government can just revoke a company's value at any time, if it runs mainly on the government's currency, then that, company leader is obviously beholden to the desires of the government to an extent. Where if a company was functioning completely on a cryptocurrency or on an international currency, then no one government could devalue a company directly. So it could possibly shift the power balance between major business leaders and major political leaders. That's just a speculation that's taking it a little far, but it is interesting to think about. As always, thank you for watching the video. I hope that you learned something. I'm glad that you guys stuck around until the end. Please subscribe. I'm trying to get monetized on YouTube. So see you guys in the next video. Peace.